Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch You Want, and thanks for logging on. Today I want to talk about a moving target, and that's the definition of the word vintage. There's no set definition of vintage within the watch collecting fraternity, even as the word is, I would say, among the most charged and loaded and frequently used and abused in the collecting hobby. We cannot agree on what vintage is, but I'll say this much. As someone who is on the cusp of 33 years old, anything that's my age feels pretty old to me. Now, here's the thing. 20 to 30 years is the threshold of vintage, so we're not picking the collectibles of today, we're picking the collectibles of tomorrow when we focus on that 20 to 30 year old range. So today I'm going to highlight a couple of emerging vintage watches, call them embryonic classics, that I think are worth buying to enjoy today and perhaps to keep as investments tomorrow. No promises, but I'm going to do my best. Now, you know I love Jaeger-LeCoultre. The company means a lot to me. I'm heavily invested in models and I never sell. But there is one icon that stands above the rest, and it is the Reverso. As much as I love the Memovox, as much as I love the triple calendar watches, all of those take a backseat to the original revolving case watch from JLC. And in 1991, the company was picking itself up off the mat following the quartz crisis of the 70s and 80s. And the Reverso was experiencing its 60th anniversary, so a special watch was in order. And it was the 60th anniversary Reverso of that year, the first of the so-called Grand Tie cases that were 42 millimeters lug to lug, big for a Reverso back then, that made JLC's comeback statement. Now, it was the first of the 6 rose gold Reversos built in 500 copies each. Later would come the Tourbillon and the Minute Repeater, the GMT and the Perpetual Calendar and the Chronograph, but it was the 60th, the 60th anniversary, that made the biggest statement because JLC was coming out of the woods with a 14-karat gold movement, something no one had done up to that point, with a date, with a display case back, with a power reserve. This watch was everything JLC aspired to be once more. A great high horology house for complications, for high arts, and of course for iconic models resurrected from its glorious past, led by the Reverso. And despite the landmark status of this watch and the high regard in which it's held by collectors, it's still quite accessible, with examples being obtainable between $15,000 and $18,000. This is a rare piece of which no more are being made, given its connection with a pivotal period in the existence of one of the high houses of Swiss horology. This is an emerging classic and a future collectible that you have to consider for your collection, budget permitting. Now, Rolex is the standard. JLC is a little bit inside baseball, but Rolex is the brand everyone knows, and among Rolex models, the Submariner is king. So it's sort of ironic that the Submariner that I see as the most desirable emerging vintage reference is one that many folks don't acknowledge at all, and that is the 168000, one of several transitional Submariners. This one was most intriguing because it was the first of the 904L steel cases, and it was also the first of the 6-digit reference Submariners. But it was also only built for about 7 to 9 months in 1987. So unless you look between the lugs at 12 o'clock, you're probably not even going to know that you have one. For this reason, it's largely undiscovered, unacknowledged, and fortunately, mostly undervalued by the market. So you can pick up one of these transitional Rolexes built for only a few months in only a few thousand copies for around $6,000 for a good one. Sharp case bevels, strong unrefinished, unreplaced tritium dial, all original. You should be able to pick it up for $6,000. So not only are you getting a Rolex and a Submariner for $6,000, but you're getting a watch that is incredibly scarce and a future collectible. Now, Zenith kind of shifts back into the Jaeger-LeCoultre mode of collector darling, enthusiast darling, watch geek brand extraordinaire. However, in the modern era, Zenith has vacillated between classicism and extremism, depending on who was leading the company and when. But from the early 1990s through the early 2000s, the Rainbow series of El Primero chronographs deserves to be recognized as a modern emerging classic. Now, there were a couple of different Rainbows out there. Most folks are familiar with the one that's received a sort of tribute model in the current lineup, the Pilot's Rainbow Flyback with the quite literally rainbow-colored dial, but there were several others. Originally from 1992, the Rainbow was a sports watch with a nautical inflection. There were two versions. Tachymetric scale bezel that was fixed with non-screw-down crowns. That was 5 ATM water resistant. And then there was the water sports version with the screw-down crowns, the unidirectional rotating dive bezel, and this one was more of a wet and wild chronograph. Both of them are still new enough that when factory serviced, you can still take their original water resistance ratings at face value without fear, and the El Primero remains eminently serviceable by almost any skilled watchmaker familiar with its lubrication requirements. These are great watches that can be obtained in some cases for less than $3,000, easily less than $4,000 US dollars. And what about the Rockstar, the Flyback Calibre 405? That was, I would say, almost mind-blowingly one of the final military contract mechanical watches ever offered, as the French Naval Air Force commissioned the 405 Rainbow Flyback for its pilots in 1995, starting deliveries in 1996. By the time the French were involved in the NATO action in Afghanistan in the early 2000s, some of them were still in service. So this is a rare case of a modern mechanical watch in the luxury watch era being used, no joke, by military forces for actual missions. And despite that history and the fact that this is one of Zenith's really rare design icons, everyone knows the El Primero, but it doesn't have a face. The Rainbow Flyback has a face. Whether you get it in its colorful iteration or its black and silvered index iteration, this is a collectible. This is a future all-timer that you can pick up for below $5,000 in any of its guises. So consider any of the Rainbow Flyback, dive, or metal tachymetric scale chronographs from 1992 to 2001. And finally, I want to give a shout out to two Perpetual calendar chronographs. One of them is already emerging as a blue chip, and that's Vacheron Constantin's roughly 1992 to 2002 reference 49005. The 005 came out in 92 as a combination automatic chronograph caliber based on a Frédéric Piguet and a Vacheron Constantin Perpetual calendar module on top. Between the two, platinum and rose gold, only 800 watches were made, 800 or thereabouts, with the balance, about 500 being rose gold, 300 being platinum, and an exquisite minority of those platinum watches being shipped with a salmon-colored dial. Truly special. At 40 millimeters, it doesn't wear like a vintage watch, neither does it wear oversized. The size is perfect. The caliber 1136 QP is still serviceable, and because the 1185 base caliber is ubiquitous, in many instances, even a local watchmaker skilled in high horology pieces can service this watch. Rarity is assured. This is the pre-mass production era of Vacheron craftsmanship, and it is everything you would expect from a VC. Prices start in the $20,000 range for the rose gold piece and max out close to $40,000 for a platinum watch with a salmon dial. But if you're on a budget and you want a Perpetual calendar chronograph, IWC's 1985 to roughly 2003 Da Vinci reference 3750 in steel is your go-to. This is a watch that offers the Kurt Claus synchronized Perpetual calendar module, the first to feature it. It's a watch that has a nice wearable size, under 40 millimeters. It's between 36 and 38 depending on how you measure the oddly shaped case with its hinge lugs, but it is compatible with smaller wrists like mine. So my wrist, 16 centimeters, I wear that watch well. The hinge lugs are the key. They make it fit anything, and because they're so prominent, if you have a huge wrist, the watch still looks right. But this watch, available for under $8,000, sometimes even under $7,000, is a Perpetual calendar automatic winding Moonface chronograph, and it's a watch you'll hardly ever see, even at a Red Bar meeting, even at some sort of Manhattan watch club, even at the Horological Society of New York, wherever you go. I don't care if it's Singapore, you're not going to see too many of these, but you're going to get all of the reliability and serviceability of an IWC with a degree of complication in the Perpetual calendar chronograph that most folks immediately associate first with Patek Philippe. So these are my emerging classics, watches between about 30 years old and 20 that are going to be collectible in the future, are desirable now, and with few exceptions are still quite accessible compared to where they're going to be in a few years. Buy them to enjoy them. If investment status happens, that's just a side benefit, but trust me, you can't go wrong with any of these.